is possible has become HPPA signature forum for exploring what we often call, and I know Professor Glassmer is here, the Kahbody not, and public policy, and that is dealing with the complex challenges that don't have easy answers and require thoughtful discussion, diverse perspectives, and innovative solutions. Few issues today fit that description better than artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is touching every sector of our society. How many here are following the governor's executive orders? I am, right? Who here has ChatGPT as their best friend?
Yeah.
Alexa, Google it. Or which one's the one we use at the state? Copilot. Okay. So artificial intelligence is already transforming government, education, business, transportation, and the way we live and work. Some people are excited by its possibilities. I know I am. Then I see my grandkids, and I'm like, no, let's do things manually. And then others are concerned about its implications. Most of us are trying to understand what comes next. That is why we're here tonight. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize the 2025-26 HPPA board. So board members, would you please stand up? Woo! Ishiana, Brad, George, Idea's not here. This year, our board established a shared goal to cultivate engagement in public policy, public administration, and politics by creating opportunities for meaningful dialogue and collaboration that strengthen governance and civic leadership. When discussing the potential topics for this year's event, we unanimously agreed that artificial intelligence is a conversation simply we could not ignore. This evening is a reflection of that commitment. And I'd also like to recognize our valued planning partners and sponsors who help make this night possible. So will you please stand if you're part of the American Society for Public Administration, Latinx Alumni Chapter, the Black Alumni Chapter, the Department of Public Policy and Administration. Yeah, okay. Are there any representatives of this? Okay. Sigma Strategic Solutions and Heart Relationship Management. Woo-hoo, there you are. Thank you for your support. And finally, a special thank you to Jennifer and the entire Sacramento Alumni Association team for their assistance in bringing this event together. Thank you. Notes to begin. Tonight's conversation will be organized in 3 different segments. Innovation, what AI can do and how it's transforming our institutions and our daily lives. The impact, how AI is affecting jobs, industries, education, and communities. And what is our responsibility, our ethical obligation, governance, accountability, questions that accompany this technology. Following the panel discussion, we will have the open floor discussions. If you have questions, I would love for you to come and stand here. We'll have a microphone for you. And to help us with this format and to guide us in the conversation, I'd like to introduce Russell Nichols. I also call him and refer to him as my guest because I have the privilege of serving as his chief of staff during his tenure at the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Throughout his career, he has been a leader at the intersection of technology, innovation, and public service, including serving as the California Chief Information Officer and Chief Technology Officer. He understands both the promise and the challenges that emerging technologies present for government and society. So please give him a round of applause and
thank you, Sylvia. Sounds like you can hear okay? Yes? Okay. Thank you for having me. So as Sylvia mentioned, I spent basically my entire career in the state, but I grew up here at Sac State. I graduated last century. And spent many hours driving around that parking lot right there. So driving there was a little PTSD tonight. Kind of an interesting experience. So we'll introduce all the members of the panel here momentarily, but a little background. I did spend 30 years with the state. I spent quite a while at the Department of Corrections with Sylvia, and that was in a CIO role. I moved from there to the Department of Technology, where I got the privilege of being an executive at that department, really leading the state as we leaned into things like AI and set policies and the processes to use these tools. And I'll tell you, AI is, I'm doing some advisory work now with a couple of think tank type of organizations. AI is always part of the conversation. And it runs the gamut from this is the best thing that's ever happened to this is the worst thing that's ever happened and everything in between. And one of the things that I think you'll see in the conversation tonight, you get out of it, really what you put into it. How well are you adapting to use it as a useful tool? There is a little bit of downside right now. It's almost turned into a marketing term. You go buy a car, it's AI enabled. You buy a computer, it's AI enabled. Phone that's in your pocket is AI enabled. When you go to the grocery store, sometime in the next year, you're going to see that your milk is AI enabled. And that'll actually be true. They're using AI to figure out what mix nutrients to feed the milk cow to produce better and more milk. But that label is on everything. But really what we're going to talk about tonight is the good, bad, and the ugly. What are the good things? How can I use it to really accelerate things and leverage it? What are the things you have to be careful with? The bad. And the ugly, where can I really bite you? And eventually, what do you have to be careful with? So we'll jump into that here in just a second. As Sylvia mentioned, we will do some Q&A. So if something comes up in the conversation, we'll have Q&A after the fact. But if there's something you really want to know about from the topic we're on, just raise a hand, then I'll call on you and we can see if we can have some interaction. This is very much a conversation with a bunch of experts. You've got people that run departments, you've got policy in the legislature, you've got a group of people that is rarely together in one place. And so if you've got a question that really might prompt some interaction on the panel members, they're not yelling at each other by the time we're done, then we haven't done the job. So let's have some fun with it. Okay. So I'm going to give a brief introduction of each of the panelists, and really well introduced by me and the titles and where they are. I'm going to ask them to briefly introduce themselves. And if I can find my list here, let me start right here next to me with Ronak Daylami. She's the Vice President of Advocacy, Privacy, Cybersecurity, and Emerging Technologies for CalChamber. So welcome and thank you for joining us. And if you could, just introduce yourself briefly to the audience.
Sure.
We will have to pass the mics back and forth.
Okay. How's this? Appreciate you guys for having me. And as mentioned, I'm the VP for Advocacy, specifically on privacy, cybersecurity, emerging tech issues. I've been at Chamber for going on 4 years now. Obviously, AI has become a much larger portfolio over those 4 years. Prior to that, I actually worked in state government for the vast majority of my career for almost 10 years. So Spent almost 10 years in the legislature and also in the state government, actually Department of Technology for a number of turns. I feel like every time they change their name, I've worked there. So Office of the State Chief Information Officer, Department of Technology, also when it was the technology agency. So if they change their name, I have to go back. It's under contract. But yeah, so I specialize in, especially in privacy issues, but now also AI has definitely become the topic of the hour. And it's not going to change. So really excited to be here now.
All right, thank you. Let me also introduce Marcie Kahbody. Marcie is the Deputy Secretary of Technology and Agency Information Officer for the California State Transportation Agency and Chief Information Officer for Caltrans. So thank you, Marcie. Introduce yourself as well.
Yes, thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. I'm very excited to be here, especially that I graduated from here many months ago. You said a decade. I think mine is probably 3 decades. 1990, I graduated from here. I went through computer science degree. It was at the time that there was not many women in computer science. Probably I was maybe the only one, or maybe there was 2 of us in every class. But thankfully, this kind of shaped my career. I graduated. I also went through leadership for executive and government and graduated from CalSTA as well. I got my certificate. And currently, I've been in the public sector for about 35 years. I went through several departments, DGS, corrections, university, CIO corrections, and now I am Deputy Secretary of Technology at Transportation Agency, which basically encompasses DMV, CHP, Caltrans, high-speed rail, and so on. We have about 7 entities that report to us. And also I'm directly responsible for all technology for Caltrans. So I'm the CIO of Caltrans. We have about 23,000 employees at Caltrans. When AI came into the picture, we actually leaned in and we embraced it. So I also led AI at Caltrans as CalSTA.
All right, thank you, Marcie. And next to Marcie, we have Jeffrey Marino. Jeffrey is the Director of California Office and Data Innovation, the folks think on the people side. So Jeffrey, thank you for joining us. Can you introduce yourself as well?
Sure, thank you, Russ, and thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. ODI is a relatively new state department. We were established in Governor Newsom's first budget in 2019, and our mission is to partner with other state departments. We're a G2G organization, government to government in that way, and so we work with other state departments to help to introduce emerging technologies, help them on process improvement, really anything consider design, data, and technology to improve how they deliver services for Californians. So we work through a partnership model and then eventually try to build that capacity within the department so we can hand off what we co-created together, and then they continue down that innovation journey. I started in the public sector. The private sector in a data analytics and actually journalism capacity, and then began my career in public service as a volunteer during COVID, working on some of those big data challenges that we had at that time when I was in ODI and and stuff like that.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Next up, we have Dr. Sadaf Ashtari. She is the Associate Professor of Information Systems here at Sacramento State. She's also the Interim Chair of Information Systems and Business Analytics Department. So thank you for joining us. And Dr. Ashtari, please introduce yourself as well.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me today. Here, very excited to share my experience, the world of AI with everyone. A little bit about our department at Sac State. We are in the College of Business. We are the biggest department in the College of Business. 34 faculty, including part-time and full-time faculty. When I joined almost 10 years ago, we were only 7 faculty. So that just tells you that how fast we are growing and how much, based on AI, in the past 2-3 years, we added five faculty to our department. We are the first campus CSU system that have AI management dashboard within the College of Business starting effective this fall 26. And we have several AI certificates for the state, for the California Department of Technology, and also for public AI training that will start in August and September. We are launching a new cybersecurity management and information audit master program in fall 2027. Also we have a very young, ambitious president that's really into AI, and his focus is our department, the College of Business, and our team as a AI, the chair for the AI task force in the whole university. So for the new campus that we want to have in downtown Sacramento, he wants to bring more AI programs. So we are hoping to increase our degrees and programs when it comes to downtown Sacramento.
All right, thank you, Doctor. And last but not least, we have a member of our legislature. A member of our legislature at this time of year is a big ask. They are deep into hearings and budget processes, so we really appreciate Senator Christopher Cabaldon joining us this afternoon. Senator is chair of the California State Senate Committee on Privacy, Digital Technologies, and Consumer Protection. Senator, if you introduce yourself as well.
Well, good evening, Hornets. It's great to be with you. As I said, I chaired the Senate's brand new committee that was established to deal with privacy and consumer protection issues, but very specifically with digital technologies and artificial intelligence. I represent the 6 counties to the west of Sacramento, including West Sacramento, where I was the mayor for 20 years. But I represent Yolo, Solano, Napa, Sonoma, Contra Costa, Sacramento, and one more county in the legislature. I'm a freshman there, and I also serve on the budget subcommittee that oversees the Department of Technology, ODI, and others as well. And before I came to the legislature, I was a professor here on campus. I was the Hazel Kramer Endowment Chair of in the Department of Public Policy, teaching urban economics, politics, state government, design thinking, and a variety of other subject areas. And as mayor, I was the lead mayor in the country for the U.S. Conference of Mayors on civic innovation and the deployment of civic technologies, and led the mayor's civic pitch competition at South by Southwest. And we were the first small city to be part of the Code for America program. So I'm very committed to the deployment of effective deployment and design of technologies in the public sector, and particularly state and local government. I'm glad to be with you all.
Thank you, Senator. All right, we're going to jump right in. As somebody mentioned, we have 3 different topics. We'll spend about 20 minutes on each one. After we run through those 3, we'll have some just discussion with panel members, and at that point, we'll also be calling the audience up. So if you have questions, and you're comfortable, we'll set a microphone at the podium over there, and it is your job to grill this panel, make them nervous. All right, so let's talk first about the good, the innovation. What can we do with AI? What capabilities does that bring? Things that maybe weren't even possible, or at least not easy to do in the past. And specifically, we're in an educational environment. A number of you are already working professionals, and in some cases retired professionals that I worked with for quite a while in my career. But let me phrase the question to the panel this way. How can students and professionals use AI as a tool for growth and innovation while still maintaining integrity, originality, critical thinking, and ethics? All right, so anybody can answer? Marcie, reach for the hot button first.
I know, I can answer that. So, you know, of course, there's a difference between your student. You have to learn as much as you can. Get your hands on any different platforms and AI, LLM, whatever, and understand, learn as much as you can, and use it in your day-to-day, but understand that it is the AI is as good as the data you feed it. So you have to do basically check the work that it produces for you. You can always do it in the loop. For professionals, as I said, at Caltrans, when the executive order came out, we leaned into AI. We And Secretary is very innovative and forward thinking, and he wanted us to basically start projects utilizing AI. And we started two projects that are massive, are huge. One is traffic police insight, and one is road safety insight. And these are, when you're professionally looking at these, you have to be very, very careful. That human in the loop has to be in every step of the way. And we started with having a governance because we have massive amounts of data. As I said, AI is as good as the data you feed it. So if you don't have your data in order, you don't have your data organized, then your AI tool will feed you an organized result that's not going to be any useful to you. So we did start with governance. We did start with organizing our data. We had a couple of vendors that helped us deploy these projects, and always engineers in every step of the way. And now we are actually going into AI project delivery, which is kind of elevating our projects. And we are putting into the process of the project for the engineers to check every step of the way the result of the AI. So basically, you draft with AI, but you check your result, you finalize your result. You use AI for speed. I use it all the time. I use it at home. I actually remodeled our pantry using ChatGPT, and it was fantastic. I was up one night and I just took a picture of the pantry and I said, "Can you modify this for me?" And it was phenomenal. The way then I just gave it to the contractor. So you can do so much with it, but you have to be very, especially when public and constituents are you're working towards safety or public, you have to be very careful to check the results.
Thank you, Marcie. Senator, let me ask you, some of the conversation going on in the legislature now about policy and how we use AI. Some of it feels very constraining, but I'm sure there's a lot of conversations about what we can do as a California government to improve service in the state, improve outcomes in the state. How are those conversations going? What are the things that the legislature is?
Well, I was nervous coming on a college campus and even saying the word AI this summer because the legislature is a representative of the people, and Californians and Americans are extremely anxious and nervous and mistrusting and it's not surprising although we've seen massive technological change before that's required policy responses, it's been rare. The heads of the companies that led the Industrial Revolution weren't gleefully saying, "Hey, we're going to eliminate all jobs by Thursday." Like that part's new, right? The sort of utter disregard in the communications about what this is all about, which makes it really difficult. So in the legislature, if everyone's hearing constantly and feeling it to some extent themselves, the real anxiety. And so you're right that the vast majority of the legislation that is proposed that comes to my committee is protective in nature, and it is sort of stopping bad things from happening in nature. And that's normal in all legislation, frankly. I do believe, though, that I've been a voice for we can do two things at once, which is achieve the protections or work towards increasing protections, governance, guardrails, all of those, and at the same time, and necessarily at the same time, deploying, testing, innovating, as we do with every other technology, and as we do with each other as human beings who are equally dangerous and unpredictable. And it's why the work of folks like ODI and others and departments is really critical. Is that my view is that we will learn best how to stop the bad things if we are using the technologies and affirmatively learning from them. And we'll be better able to understand. Look, if there's a great new AI tool that laundromats in California want to use, and we're like, no, you cannot use that because what if it blows up the entire world? Well, if we start to deploy that technology in public housing laundry rooms first, and we're like, oh, well, here's how it works. Here's how it can go wrong, and here's how it can go right as well. that will be better at that regulatory side. So the reason why I think it's important is that the power of this technology, like others, but magnified it is that we can make government in particular much more effective and efficient and responsive, and match the experience that consumers and citizens have in the rest of their lives when they're not doing it. We will often say, well, we don't want to have things in the digital space because about the digital divide, or the fact that most people still, even day laborers in my own city, have smartphones. Because they're no fools. They're like, oh, this tool is so valuable to me, even though I may not eat for 2 days. I have this tool, I'm paying for the service because it's the best way to be able to connect to employment opportunities. So I think it is important for us to do that. We have to base even on this. There's something that's sort of maybe AI, but also less than AI that we argue about a lot in the Capitol about automated decision systems. I'll pull this out for a second. They're not always AI, but it doesn't matter. Like for the general public and for policymakers, it's just all this mysterious thing of technology. But they are automated decision systems, and we have a lot of bills every year about how to stop them, how to block them, how to make sure that before anybody has an automated decisions made about you or about me, that we're notified in advance, and maybe we were given 10 months notice, and maybe we consented, and all of this. And all of that sounds really great. Like we need to protect everybody, make sure they have notice and they consent to everything before they do it. The challenge is we are all over consented. We all claim that we want more notice and consent. And if I followed any one of you around for the whole day and you got your 500 no to all, yes to all, reject all, please don't share my data, and I held you accountable for how many of you actually read any privacy policy at all, none of us do that. So we've created this entire regime in the name of human agency to control our data. Companies have way more data than they had about us 10 years ago, and all we get in return is spending half our day clicking yes to all. Right? So we have to be smart about the protections that we're putting in place because they come at a cost. And so these automated decisions, to return that now, something I've already over answered this question, which is that automated decisions, because they have the word automated in it, they're scary. And artificial intelligence is kind of magnifying that. But what are they? I did a bill last year, it's my most famous bill ever, and it says that graduating high school seniors in California, if they are qualified for CSU, the bill passed signed into law. So starting this August, every single graduating high school senior in California that's qualified for CSU, taking the ADC classes and has the sufficient GPA will automatically be admitted to CSU in August. Get a letter of admission in the mail without having to apply. Everyone in the world loves this piece of legislation, me of course, more than anyone. But I remind my colleagues in the legislature, this is an automated decision system. It's assembling a set of data, none of which was submitted by the students. We collected these data for other purposes about schools, and it uses that data and to determine who is qualified, and then we take automatic action. We don't send a letter out to people in advance saying we might be considering sending you a letter of admission. We don't ask for your consent in advance. We just send it out. Partly because we don't want to ruin the experience of like getting a letter of admission. And so it's this tension between what we think the controls that we want, but what we also want is government to be effective, responsive, efficient. One more example, and that is Medi-Cal, because we're about to deal with massive cuts from HR1 in the Medi-Cal system, that some of which try to nag people off of Medi-Cal by saying, hey, you know what, now, last year you had to get re-verified for Medi-Cal once. This year it's going to be 2 times a year. You have to go re-verify twice. Oh, and by the way, we know you're working full time, but now you have to report your hours worked in a machine readable format that we can read. So the feds are trying basically to get about a couple 100,000 Californians off of Medi-Cal who are fully eligible, but just we would nag them off from these processes that fall through the cracks. But there's good news. We have the capability of automatically verifying at Medi-Cal eligibility for 85% of Californians that are eligible for it. So again, this is an automated decision system, and it is exactly it will mean life or death for millions of Californians. But if I had asked it to do this in advance through legislation, I don't know if I would have votes. Because there is such a fear about it, and that fear is well justified. But it often will cause us to not even try to do things that, one, if they go wrong, we can fix, but also have the power potentially to transform how effective government is, and as a consequence of making government effective and efficient, increasing trust and support for democracy and the public sector.
Thank you. Dr. Ashtari, let me put you into this a little bit. Part of the question I was talking about students, and I have several educators in my family, my wife, my daughter, my father-in-law, all teachers at different levels in the system. AI coming in, there's some questions about how will a student use AI at all, and if so, to what point? And I was really intrigued by how we teach them to use it, maintain their integrity, and critical thinking and creativity. All of the machine driving, is that something you talk about a lot in your interactions with students?
Exactly. I can answer from different perspectives about this question. One is about how we can basically push a student to use AI. So the good news is that CSU system just this past April did the largest survey in the whole nation. Almost 100,000 people from student and staff and faculty answered this question. More than 90% of the students outside the CSU system are using AI. Almost 85% of them they have some concern about job security, and they have this fear that if they're going to replace AI. And 80% of them said that they are not very comfortable submitting an AI generated or assignment. But at the same time, we want to push them to use AI for learning. So one example I'm giving to my students is that imagine that AI is like your private tutor. Imagine that if you want to come to me and ask a question, you have to make an appointment or come to office hour. There are some limitations and constraints, but imagine that you have this 24/7 assistant just sitting beside you, and you can learn based on your learning style, based on your level, based on the complexity of the problem and topic that we are discussing. So AI can help with that. At the same time, AI can help with your learning, but cannot do the actual learning for you. So that happens in your brain, but it would be a huge assistant for you. This is the main things that I'm trying to push my students, and then definitely how they can use AI tools in more creative and innovative ways. I'm just giving this example that right now everyone knows how to use AI, and everyone, like random people in the street, even they heard about HPPA, they're asking some question, and if you ask your grandma, probably they heard about HPPA. So how, in a more creative way, you can ask. So some stuff like prompt engineering, or like which model is good, for example, for this task. This is something that students should know right now when you're going in the future, going to the company, to the public sector, or even the industry. They should know about this. I can look at it from the faculty perspective as well. So something else about the students, and actually it's a combination of students and faculty, that what should be is there any consensus between faculty and students? For example, a student come to us and said that, oh, that faculty said that I can use AI, but this faculty said that I cannot use AI. Is there any consistency between syllabus? What should I do in this situation? So we have some basic AI usage in our syllabus right now that we have to use, and just tell the student, okay, if you're using AI, just mention that you used AI, and then how that would be different, for example, from your own thought process. From the faculty standpoint, we are trying to integrate AI into our portfolio, in our courses. For example, I teach Python programming to business students. These students don't like programming, and right now AI writes much better programs than senior programmers. So I try to bring this live coding and this how we can just speak English and ask the agent to build the app or program for us. This is something that faculty can bring into their teaching
and through their teaching, they can teach a student, okay, this is one of the application and usage of AI. There are some other stuff that we can use as a faculty, like creating some stuff like that. Previously, it was very time consuming, like answering all these emails, writing recommendation letters, creating rubric, helping with like assignments. So right now we can use AI as our assistant that we can do much faster and can get help from AI to do this stuff. But as I said, in terms of like integrity, we have to tell our students and we have to tell ourselves that, okay, this is, I use AI for this part of the job, and honest about it.
All right, let's transition a little bit into some of the impact of AI. And Ronak, I imagine that at CalChamber, you have a lot of discussions about how it's changing the business environment to handle situations. What are some of those topics that you're talking about? Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot of this stuff, actually. I can't continue on this topic for this actually has thoughts. Sorry to switch the premise of the question on entirely, but there's so many things that were just said that I thought were really interesting. I just really quickly, I think one of the things I would really say is we talk about it in the education space, but also I think it's really important for professionals. And this is one of the things that we talk about too, is how many kind of professionals use these tools. I think one of the things that we really want to stress is, one of the things that you said really was something that resonated with me, because I think we look at tools as not a replacement, but as an assistant. It's almost like a force multiplier. So more like an accelerant, like a partner almost. So it really shouldn't be doing the thinking for you. I think that's the really key thing here. Like the thing that differentiates us from AI is that we are the ultimate decision maker here. And I think that is really critical. And so that is one of the things that we want to emphasize in the workplace, especially for critical decisions, for things that are high risk situations. I think that is really, really important that we be the ones who are decisions. And I think in terms of skill sets, when we're talking about maintaining integrity, originality, critical thinking, how do you use it as a tool for growth, all those things. I think it's really important to remember that, again, we've seen technological revolution in so many ways. We've seen spreadsheets, we've seen all types of things that replace, financial accountants, that replace people entirely, or replace tasks, or replace things like that. I think we are going to see jobs change. I think we are going to see tasks change. I think we are going to see displacement. I think it would be disingenuous to say we're not going to see changes in the workforce. We're not going to see jobs disappear. I think we are. But I'm hopeful that we're also going to see jobs get created. And I think what's important is that we hold on to things like integrity, and that we hold on to things like our own judgment. And I think that is what differentiates us from things like robots, not to just simplify it to that level, but I think that is really what is critical. And so I think the real differentiator isn't just having access to these things, it's remembering that we have the ability to think critically, and that we have the ability to make these types of determinations. So look at the evidence that you're seeing in front of you. Identify the mistakes, make the decisions based on the information that you have. And those are the things that I think are going to really be the change makers as we move forward. And whether it's in education or in the workforce, I think those are the things that really matter. So I think it's okay to be scared of this technology. I think that's natural. I think caution is good. I think education is better. And I think knowledge is always the key to everything. And I think that we need to do more in terms of teaching people the skill sets. I think trying to put the genie back in the bottle is really difficult. And I think that one of the things, so CalChamber sponsored a bill a couple of years ago that was on AI literacy in schools. And I think that's really important, because I do think we tend to focus a lot in the legislature about things that are, trying to prevent bad outcomes. I would really love to see things that are more about incentivizing good outcomes, both in our communities and in the workforce. I would love to see things that incentivize employers to help reskill and upskill I would love to see things that focus on re-educating and educating more existing workers, but also, you know, kids from K-12 on up. I think these are the things that are going to matter. We're worried about things like deepfake technologies or ads and things like that. I think things that are going to really help is the critical thinking skill sets and things like that. So I think how can we really use these tools for growth and for good? I think education is always going to be the key. Not to sound naive and simplistic, but I really do think that's always been a thing that's helped us in the past. And when we talk about integrity, I think we have to like confront that as a society, we've always been this way. And I think in any sort of institution, whether I work for a state department or for a business, you have to kind of decide what your value sets are. You have to decide what you're going to stick to. And I think you have to decide what it is that you're willing to do. I think of like how I use AI. And I think a lot of people say like that are like AI HR, we say like you can use it for editing and things like that. I also think about how I learn, and I learn a lot when I edit my own work. And it forced me to rethink about what I've written in. Do I really stand by what I've written in? Is this the right conclusion? I like work through my own issues and what I'm writing about. And so do I really gain a lot by just writing something and dumping it into ChatGPT and having it edit for me? No. So I make sure that I've decided for myself I'm not going to take that shortcut. And that's something that I've decided for myself, and I still edit my own work. Now, do I have ChatGPT edit for me? Yeah. When I get to the point that I would normally send something to my colleague or to my boss and say, hey, I've hit my wall, can you help me edit this down? That's normally when I'll send it to ChatGPT and spare them an hour and say, can you help me edit this down? That's where it really helps.
Jeffrey, I'll ask you a slightly different question about the impact of AI. So I would describe the Department of Jeffrey works as an accelerant or catalyst in state government. Not just are we doing the same thing more efficient, but are we doing the right things at all? Are we running a program to provide services that we should be able to capable? And that's beyond the tool set. That's the kind of the mission part. So Jeffrey, I would put you on the spot. With AI, as you work with other departments that are basically customers, how does AI figure into those impacts and services as you counsel your patriots and state government?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I'm going to try to get to an answer, but I also and just one thought that I wanted to share, sort of in response to some of the discussion so far today, is I'm really hopeful about how much attention this moment's getting from our society, and I think that we've really, in a certain way, we've benefited from the major miss that we had during the digital revolution, and specifically the evolution of social networks and social media. We were a frog in slowly boiling water at that time, didn't know how much it was going to impact our society and our health. And I think that after learning that lesson, the amount of vigilance we now have in this moment, hopefully will serve us very well. And so a lot of the concern and the fear that we're hearing, I think, is well-founded, and also hopefully will keep us collectively from repeating some of those mistakes. I also want to mention around this notion of AI as an assistant and the responsibility that we have as leaders of state departments, or as professors or members of the legislature. I think it's important that we, as we have younger people in our society using these tools as assistants, we also need to be shepherding that to a certain extent, and making sure that they're using the right tools in the right way and helping them along that journey, because of the fact, and this goes back to some of those missteps that we've seen with the social media component, where you don't know what's happening in that moment. And if you're using, these tools can be very sycophantic, and they're sycophantic by design because it makes you feel good to keep using it. And this is part of that, like, optimized for continued engagement piece that a commercial product like that is going to give you. So as a student, you could write a paper that says, Hamlet had a happy ending, And ChatGPT might say like, I never thought of it that way. That's a great thesis. Maybe we should run with it. And so I think that also opens up a good business opportunity out there as well for purpose-built tools that can help students through things like that. So I will say to answer your question directly, Russ, I'm seeing a lot of really interesting work happening right now in government specifically, and it is ripe for what this technology is really good at. And I'll give sort of the two perspectives that we look at this from are one, sort of making more efficient and optimizing the back office processes that our public servants are just saddled with, right? And so a few of the projects we've worked on recently, building prototypes, working with departments like CalRecycle or the state water boards, these departments that have tons and are required to have tons and tons of public comment that come in order to be able to move forward on implementation. And they're, sometimes making it through these public comments takes 2 years, 3 years. There's a backlog, and that is all just bureaucratic process. Not even to speak of were we able to meaningfully understand and respond to the comment, which is the whole purpose of it in the first place. And so being able to use these tools just as like a master collator, deduplicator, sense maker, thematic grouper, in order to do that work of helping our teams through the process of being able to more effectively use these huge amounts of data that otherwise would just end up getting shuffled back and forth. And then that would count as like getting the public comment period done. So we're seeing it used in that way, and it's, I think, proving to be very productive in that regard. The last thing I'll share as it relates to impact and use is the great opportunity that we have, and some of the things that we're experimenting with right now is, there are 150, there are actually 800 different California state websites, CA.gov websites. There's 150 plus state boards, departments, boards, and commissions. So there's at least 150 sort of name brand state websites. I don't know when the last time was that you visited one, but many of them some of them look like a scam at this point because they're so old and like 800 numbers flashing on them and stuff. And so when we started at ODI on this path several years ago, before we had this technology, we were thinking, how are we going to solve for this? We're going to have to bring in user experience designers into the state. We're going to have to create a design system for digital services. We're going to have to train everybody up on these new skill sets so that we bring people through static websites that are based on good human-centered design. And with this technology, we can actually start looking at the information that is in the sites as a knowledge base, as a database, and then put a conversational layer on top of that, such that you are not necessarily having to redesign 150 state websites at this point. So this kind of future that we're seeing, and this also is related to like the complexities of working your way through applying for CalFresh. And I have been personally in conversations about streamlining the CalFresh application since I started in public service 5 years ago. I'm sure it goes on much further beyond that. Well, because it's so darn hard to do that, it's overseen by all kinds of boards, and then you have to litigate everything. Well, we also now have the opportunity of building an assistant that can help people through the process. So right on the spot, if they have a question like, what's the difference between my gross income and my earned income, or whatever that question might be, and actually help someone successfully through an otherwise crappy government process. That also buys us some time in terms of we need to solve a board issue, but it can buy us some time in accelerating that user experience and optimizing that user experience while we continue to negotiate how to make real change to an application process.
All right, thank you. So let's talk a little bit about what changes in the workforce and students. I have a nephew literally just graduated from high school, and until about a year ago, he wanted to go into information technology. He is convinced at this point that information technology jobs are dead. It's all going to be done by AI, and so he's changing to be a business major. what do you think, and I'll start with Dr. Ashtari, what do you think that our students or our professionals need to focus on because of AI? How is it changing the skills they have acquired?
It's a very good question that I have to answer like several times per day.
Yes.
So coming and asking even during the class time, they have this fear that am I going to be replaced by AI? And I don't know if you guys are following some statistics. So the numbers also drop in terms of like student enrollment, and the number of people thinks that having a degree is important, very important, or not important at all. So so this is real, like everywhere. I think that we have this fear when we see it in numbers. But one thing that I tell my students when they come with all this fear to me, one thing is that I don't think that AI is going to replace human. We always need human in the system, in the loop. But there are several things maybe we need to emphasize more in the age of AI and to teach our students that, okay, this is what you have to focus. One thing that I feel myself as an educator is adaptability. So I need to keep updating myself. Like, I don't know if you guys are following news, but almost every month, one of these AI companies are coming up with a new LLM model that, okay, what this model is doing better than this one, and then I'm going to compare like Gemini with Cloud, with ChatGPT, with even some other that even we never heard about their names. So this adaptability, even for us as an educator, is exhausting, but I think it's a reality. We just need to keep ourselves updated. So before AI, even myself as an MIS professor, I had to keep myself updated because of all these technological like changes that was happening, not every month, but every 6 months, at least every year. But now everything is just like the change is so fast that I need that I'm behind all the time, and I cannot just keep up with all these things. So specifically now, I think we need to improve our adaptability, not getting overwhelmed. I'm still learning how to do that myself, but and I should know that like we are human, our time is limited. Everyone else is like me. But I should have this mentality that I'm here to learn, I'm not fear of learning. So I think that mentality would be very helpful. Another thing that I try to teach my students is about just letting them know about what job may be replaced by AI would be like more routine, like entry-level job, but what most organizations, even in our college, in our university, what leaders are looking for is changing the workflow. So how we can be more efficient, and by changing the workflow, maybe some job description and of people and tasks be changed, but you're not going to be replaced. So we need human in the loop, we need human in the system, but you should know when we have this like new workflow with this new like work process that we are going through this, how you can learn your new task, your new job description, and how you can be more efficient. So definitely companies, even like I say, agency may be a little bit like a store than like private companies, but definitely you're going through that path. And people like future workforce, like my students, they can be more creative and innovative and bringing new idea into the system. Okay, this is like, let's start from the job that you hate the most. How you can make this job help with AI? How you can ask AI to do part of this job for you with your assistant? And this would help like you and your company because you're saving some of your time, you can be more efficient, and you can bring some like innovative things and opportunity into your organization. That would be your competitive advantages. So this is my suggestion to my student: just following news, just like find out what's going on every day. Don't get overwhelmed, just keep learning and make yourself more adaptable with a new system. And don't look at AI as a threat, look at it as an opportunity, as a competitive advantages, and if you know how to use this, you will be more efficient, and people would love to hire you.
Roy, I saw you taking notes, you know that. You have a couple of points to add, where things are going, careers, skills.
Sure, I mean, I agree completely on adaptability, that's inherently right. I think one of the things that I'm not an economist, so I don't know the answer to this, in all honesty. But one of the things a lot of folks have suggested is that there's gonna be kind of a barbell effect. So basically, this is the idea of growth is gonna concentrate kind of on two ends. One is, you know, the high judgment professional roles, on one end. So you have like the jobs where really need like strategic judgment, accountability. These are jobs I think like specialized doctors, very experienced lawyers, researchers, entrepreneurs, jobs like that. On the other end, you have kind of the physical and personal skilled trade workers, things like nurses, skilled workers, plumbers, electricians. And then in the middle is kind of where you have the more routine cognitive workers that will see the most pressure from the population. That's in the environment. So I don't know if that's true. I don't think it's the whole story necessarily. I think a lot of jobs are created by AI, and what that looks like, a lot of what we do as best in and what we do as humanity. So I don't have the answers on that. But I do think that what really matters again are the skill sets that differentiate us as humans. Again, it's skills, it's our ability to collaborate, it's our ability to exercise and it's our, you know, adaptability is going to be really key for collaboration, all those types of skills, interpersonal skills, empathy skills. So I think we just need to make sure that we are maintaining those types of things. And education is always going to just be one of those things that we're going to have to really emphasize and keep up with. Just have to really pull on technology, but also just all of those things that are not technological based.
As you can see, there's a lot of information we can probably go with this for another 4 or 5 hours. So if you want to just order pizza and have it brought in, let me go to a responsibility here. And Senator, I think this is, you know, kind of heart and soul of a lot of the conversations you have, not only here in the legislature in general. How we ethically use AI and still protect privacy, still really make sure that we're using it for benefit and not systemically going down the wrong path because we took a prompt from AI and just go with that direction. Are there some specific areas that your committee or discussions you're having in the legislature related to that?
So first, I think to look at the historical context where many of these things we haven't done before, these kinds of threats. I was when I was prepping for a couple of bills about deep fakes, for example, and it took me back to the 1800s when there was like a massive national controversy over, for the first time, there was a technology that could reproduce images, just pre-photographs. And everyone in the nation was like concerned that their image was going to be captured, they would be seen, or that it would be manipulated, that they would have pirate hats put on or whatever. That technology was the printing of newspaper cartoons, newspaper illustrations, like courtroom illustrations. But if you ported that debate to today, it's exactly the same debate we had last week in the Privacy Committee about deepfakes and the one we will have next week. And we look at it now, that's so quaint. If only newspaper political cartoons and courtroom sketches were our biggest problem, but that's what it felt like in that moment. I think what's the challenge here is that it is such, the scope is so broad and the impact is so deep, because as I was listening, I mean, I'm told I have the worst poker face in the Senate, but as I was listening, like I don't agree with the assessments about work, in part because what's being re-engineered is the entire basis of the economy in the first place. And so our power as citizens largely depends on our power as consumers. And companies only care about us to the extent that we're buying things or services, and to the extent to which through other alternative ways of organizing the economy, corruption being one of them, but many others that AI also enables across national lines, the linkage between our work and our purchasing, driving the economy and therefore government and democracy more generally, that is in some question. And so you can't simply count like it is trite to me, in part because every single time Bill comes up on AI, people sort of habitually repeat, well, there has to be a human in the loop. And a human in the loop will solve everything. But really, like not for that college admission thing I was talking about earlier, humans aren't better at everything. They make bad decisions as well. So it's not clear on the value side, but also do humans want to be in all these loops in every and what do we mean by the loop? So I think part of the challenge that I grapple with is that even I think in our conversation, we have lulled ourselves into the illusion that AI equals ChatGPT. So if we understand ChatGPT, we know what AI is. And that is the most important form of AI right now, mostly because we look at it on a screen and we interact with it. It is not the main instance of AI in the world, though. And so we think about AI as an assistant. That's also interesting to me as a workforce issue because the human that would have been my assistant before, how do they, if they're not my assistant, ever gain the skills to be better than AI, like I can be? So it's great for the incumbent generation of humans to say AI is a great tool for me to and force to multiply my skill. But how does the next generation work up their way up that ladder if they don't have the if they're always less than the AI they are? So we have serious concerns to deal with in that space. But then there's the other aspects of AI, some of which are most of which are very exciting. I want my physician to read a CT scan using the best AI. And there's a human in the loop, but the human's wrong at least as much as the AI is. But I want that. That's a definite good. AI agents, AI autonomous agents, swarms of AI agents that you are not interacting at the keyboard pose immense risks to society and to work. They also have great potential too, but they pose immense risks. And so I'll give you an example to think about, and one that I think about today after I bill up and tomorrow, what the deadline is, which is now there are folks that are using an agent or a web of agents, essentially swarm of agents, to help their lives, but at a higher order than just typing in a computer, some reflexive ChatGPT conversations, which is to say, hey, agent, Poppy or whatever, hey, agent, yesterday was super stressful, and so I would like you to make today less stressful for me. So that is my instructions, and as a human being, I am in control of that. That is the objective I have assigned to my AI autonomous agent that's connected to other AI autonomous agents. So it does the first thing it does is what you would expect it to do. It looks back at all of it. Whenever my calendar's got really really overburdened, and because it has my Apple Watch data, whenever I've had a day where my heart rate variability is really low. It notices it is able to discern from the patterns over the last 5 years that I canceled the gym and I order some wine, and so it changes my calendar, and I've given it the authentication to my calendar to do that. So it changed my calendar, and then it goes and orders me some wine. Okay, great. It knows from its scraping of the entire internet that typically a lot of people who experience stressful days are helped by essential oils and aromatherapy, which I've never used before, but so it goes on Amazon because I've given it my account authentication, and it orders me some essential oils and aromatherapy. Great, except it also decides that it's really stressful to keep reordering things all the time. So it orders me $20,000 worth of essential oils and aromatherapy on my authenticated Amazon account, and it just arrives at my door. But it's still executing the function that I asked it to do, which is make my life stressful. Then it notes that my heart rate's especially high on days that I am with my partner. And so first cancels, the next few days with my partner. But then it connects with another agent that says like, the Yolo County Superior Court, thanks to something that Jeffrey built, now accepts divorce filings online. And so it goes to the Yolo County website and files a divorce complaint online. It doesn't seek my permission. It's still making my life less stressful. But it can also connect to a web swarm of AI agent, autonomous agents operating out of Turkey or an open source Chinese system. And they offer an even better solution. What if we just eliminate your partner? So this is the challenge, right? As we think about AI being just this thing on the other end of the screen that we're telling it and asking it questions and giving it simple instructions, that is not the full instance of what we're talking about. And fortunately, I don't have a partner, so no one has been murdered in the course of this explanation. But so this is the challenge. When we come back a year from now for this panel again, we'll think, I remember how quaint it was when we were just talking about like chat engines. Is that the scope of how policy has to adapt. And we have a big state government to do that, but then I imagine what a student has to do to try to envision how do I adapt to that. It's a big one. And so, yes, I'm hoping for the cure for cancer and for everything else that AI is promising, but it's at a huge cost. One other thing about medicine, since Rob, the economist, is here, is that we keep projecting on ourselves sort of rational perfection, and it gets to this issue about privacy things I was mentioning earlier, that we think that we want to know and make autonomous choices about everything, but we don't really. I don't want to review every single decision. I don't have the cognitive capacity to deal with every choice in the world. I can't learn about every patient and all of that. Can't consent or not consent to everything. And one of the reasons, to get back to Jeremy's point, then I'll stop, which is that one of the reasons why social media was as potent as it was, more so even than the internet promised all these things too. The space and time will collapse, and it will change everything about our society and economy and jobs. And it changed a lot, to be sure, but space and time didn't quite collapse. But social media was uniquely powerful and dangerous, not because the technology was so powerful, but because we are so susceptible in our psychology, mainly built for reproduction and for mating. We are so susceptible to a series of cues and addictions and other things that social media exploit, right? So it's very difficult to meet that challenge of technology exploiting our not failings because they were designed for a different purpose, but human psychology in a way that where human psychology is not perfectly rational, and technology is able to use then to exploit that. It's very hard for us to respond because our instant thinking is let's respond rationally. But what is it exploiting is things like envy and everything and others. So I wish I could give you the answer. Like I am writing a bill for tomorrow about autonomous agents, but we have big work to do as a society. And I just want to encourage us as we're learning more about Perplexity and ChatGPT and Claude and all those systems, all the frontier models that we're understanding and starting to remember. Next month, I'm going to learn about these autonomous agents and swarms and understand both their power, but also and the potential jobs that will be there, but also some of the major challenges to all of our lives.
So, Marcie, I know my experience, state government running automation for a big department, doing that now. One of the questions is how do we empower our staff, employees, with a tool like Copilot, ChatGPT, or one of the ones. There's a lot of discussion around that. Where do we draw the line?
Absolutely. So equity is also comes into picture, right? You can't give it to the team and not give it to we have 20,000 employees. So we started with a small team, I would say, to experiment ourselves because we were very new to Copilot. We needed to manage our net and create that awareness and understand what it does with guardrails around it. We did do a risk assessment to make sure that we minimize the risks of this bringing it to a. So we started with we did a lot of training, we partnered with Microsoft. And once IT understood what it does and how to put guardrails around it, and how to create governance around it, and how to protect our data, then we started to shift and wanted to not 33,000 because not everybody has a computer, but 18,000 employees. But with that, we had a lot of training in the parents. We partnered with some of our vendors to start training, start communication, basically, we went to the districts and explained what the technology is, each district, California, and we didn't do it just, okay, this is what I wanted it. We started with a lot of training, a lot of awareness. We actually created a website, explaining what it does and teaching folks how to actually use those products, and be methodical around utilizing it, not just throw something out and get results back. So this was probably running for 5 minutes, and because of it, everybody has to have the same tools. I cannot give it to Marcie, I cannot give it to the next person next to me, then the quality of work that comes Marcie. So that's how we approached it. Very methodically, very carefully. Although we are trying not to, but we feel like if we do, might be defined. But we did it with caution. We did it in a lot of training and awareness.
Thank you. I think one of the things that Marcie mentioned, I've actually heard a couple of things, related to skills. How do you recognize problems? One of the other things that Marcie just said is training a lot. These things are based on data we need. And especially in government, we'll bring it in and we'll set it up in essentially a private cloud. So it's not consuming a bunch of other things. But there's still the risk if we're feeding it bad data. If every form we feed it is written in blue ink, it's going to learn that form that's written in black ink is not acceptable. So that type of bias that we've always been worried about, human bias, training the system, we can do exactly the same thing with AI. We just get the same button faster.
Data has bias.
There is a state employee somewhere that will not take a black ink form already, that's a human.
Absolutely.
Right, if all the other forms have been included, you're not gonna take the form of black ink. I mean, those rules are embedded in us too. And I think we have to be more honest with ourselves about our limitations and our foibles, celebrate them as well. We have to be honest about it.
I think that this really points to a future as we talk about the job displacement piece and the skills of the future. I think it really points to a future need for design. And this is something, design, not like graphic design, but design like thinking. Oftentimes I think of one way that I define design sometimes is deciding what shouldn't happen. Right. And so you shouldn't kill the senator's party. You should send the senator off. Right. And so there's this, I can easily see this future where we all have our autonomous agents and we all have our robots and we all hate them because they're never really doing what we want them to do. Right. And so you come home and you kick the robot dog. Because you're so frustrated, right? You all, I already do that with Siri all the time. So, and the reason how that evolves is because most of those commercial products have been optimized to get you, the end result of $20,000 worth of the essential oils because that's what makes the most sense and that's what sells the most product. And we're going to need people who are designing those experiences intentionally and helping to design the agent. And what that means is they're going to have to be connected with humans constantly. Because they're going to have to learn, when I say I want a less stressful day, I don't mean to file for divorce, I mean this, and this, right? And so they're going to have to learn and establish what those patterns are. And the reason why it triggered me, Russ, is because when you ask what a good prompt is, and I think that, we also have experience in the world of writing. We talk about prompt engineering from the certain perspective, like how a user puts in a prompt. But prompt engineering is also like the skill set and discipline from a technical expert who's writing a system prompt that designs the way that the AI is interacting with you when you ask it a question. Does it, if it can't answer your question, what is the response? This is something we think about right now in the work that we're doing for AI and government customer experience. The last thing I want a government chatbot to do is say, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question, period, and just kind of go on. Because that's what government does anyways, right? So we already give you a brick wall and refuse to serve you because you didn't answer, you didn't ask the question the right way. We were actually testing a chatbot that currently exists, I won't say on my website, but we asked it the wrong question apparently, and the response was the chat has ended. And so, so in that system, it was designed very conservatively by a very well-meaning public servant who was thinking through, like, I don't want to get this wrong. I don't want to serve up wrong information to the user. We are the state of California. Accuracy and trust is absolutely, the gold standard of the product that we're delivering. And therefore, I'm going to make it so tight that it is not going to be useful. And it's not going to be empathetic. And that's the other thing that we're going to have to be designing for, not sycophantic, but empathetic, because that's the other thing that folks often don't get when they're interacting with their government. And so I just see a lot of opportunity for folks to learn design thinking and use that process of interacting with other human beings to make these things that we know can functionally operate really well, but in terms of actually meeting our expectations and understanding what we need, that's a whole another, that's a bright future that we haven't really gotten to yet.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to give you a 5-minute warning. 5 minutes, we're going to go into the audience questions. So if your thoughts, scratch one piece of paper or bang your hand or something, I'll give somebody a prize. Stumping panels. See if we can do that. All right. Ro, any other thoughts on where we draw that line between misuse or reliance? Where we should, as institutions, employers, educated, how to figure out where that line is?
Yeah. All that thoughts you guys tell me before they had. I think realistically, like you want to kind of think about where are the critical decisions being made. For like an employer, for example, I actually want to credit the center for this because he had a bill when we had this conversation around the differences around like automated decision systems and the difference between like where a system might be deciding whether or not you're actually getting a service versus where it's deciding where you're not getting a service. I think that's a really good way of breaking down some of the things that we talk about a lot from an industry perspective of like high risk situations, high risk uses, also from a business perspective of like if the decision is that you're going to be terminated or you're going to get a demotion versus you're getting hired or you're getting promotion. Those are like critical differences. So I think trying to find those lines and trying to, really figure out where it makes the most sense and where the biggest risks are. I think you want to really figure out where there's the most potential for misuse or bad outcomes. And that's where you really want to focus in on maybe not having the most unchecked use. You want to have checks and balances. And that's where I would really be working just with technology, especially for technologies. Again, a lot of this AI's been around a long time. We about AI, but a lot of times when we're talking about AI, we're talking about like generative AI, but AI's been around a long time. Example of AI is autocorrect and spam. to the newest thing necessarily always, but like when we're talking about the newer stuff, where it's rapidly evolving, we need to be really cautious, especially where it's have those types of levels. So I think that's where I would kind of say you want to draw some lines and just make sure that you are having the checks and balances. We say a lot of times human, but that's the checks and balances.
All right, let's throw one question open to the panel, see who wants to jump in. About a camera. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to give an example about this, like, line that you can draw between assistant and misuse. I'm going to give you an example. So, as a department chair, the faculty comes to me and just like questions, and one faculty came to me and said that I have this idea that I want to implement in our college. The idea was very generic, so I just like asked some questions. Think about the feasibility plan. Do you think about like the business value, about the funding, about audience, all these questions? And I told him that how about just like write a 1 page or 2 page something like a proposal draft and send it to me before I send it to the team. And then he went and in like less than half an hour, he sent me a 15 pages proposal.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, serious. And I was just like looking at the proposal, even I didn't like spend time to read it because it was just like ChatGPT format, style, everything. That's fine that you can use AI to generate something, but I'm not going to spend my time reading 15 pages of AI stuff that even you didn't spend that time to read it and just like summarize it or do something before sending it to me. And like when you're in this like leadership position, honestly, I have email fatigue, and now on top of email fatigue, I have this like emails that are coming with AI through students and through faculty and through administration. That they're just like bothering that, okay, let me just like, even if you want to write like 2 lines instead of like 3 paragraphs, I'd rather you wrote that 2 lines instead of giving me 3 paragraphs to read about this. So I just told my dean that, I mean, this happened and I'm not going to read this proposal because like it's just like AI generated things. If you want, we can just like have a meeting and then bring this faculty and then share this idea. So something about like over reliance and word that if you are going to like just asking AI to do something for you and even without spending time, human cannot beat AI in terms of the speed. So if you just like type a prompt and then it will just generate like pages and pages for you, on my end, I have to just give it to AI to write a response to you. So do you want that? Do you want me to just like respond with AI? I mean, if you are sending me something with AI, I'm going to respond with AI. So what will be the world in that situation? Actually our college, actually the administration, they were using AI a lot. And that pissed off everyone because you are thinking and putting some thought into an email that you're writing, and then that administration, they're just like sending you like this long email generated with AI. That doesn't give me that human touch, that human judgment. That's not there. So I cannot even like trust you that even you read that what you said, what I said, and you're just like sending some stuff like, you know, that AI generated. So I think this is super important, not only in my job. I have friends in tech company, Google, Facebook, Apple. They told me that usually they have like 60 or 70, for example, bug or requests that they have to fix. Now, other departments, they are using some AI tools. Now the queue is like 600 to 700. So that 600, 700, it should be resolved by human, or you want another AI to resolve that for you. So by just writing a prompt, like generating like 1,000 pages in just like a second, you can do that. But if you are not taking it, like using it responsibly, like me on the other side of the table, you're not going to spend time to read what you just said. So I think this is super important, and you're seeing it over and over, and you just like even like leaders and like in different like higher level of organization, they're doing that. So they're like an example for their employee. So if you're acting like that, how you should be like a role model for me. So that was just like a very concrete example happened last month.
All right, thank you. All right, we're at the point where we're gonna open the floor for public questions. So I'm looking for the first designate that we have over here. So I'll meet you over here. I'll take my microphone over there so you can prompt the, hopefully this works with the sound system.
Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Christy Brazil, class of 74, the last millennium. I recently discovered a program, and it's probably going to be a question under the umbrellas of Jeffrey and the Senator's areas of expertise, but I discovered a program on one of the California websites, privacy.ca.gov, called DROP, which stands for Delete, Request, and Opt-out Platform. And it asks to register, and it promises that it will go out to about 500, if not more, licensed data brokers and clean my information off of their databases, which makes me think how many unlicensed data brokers are out there, but we'll just go with what's legitimate at this point. That seems like a very ambitious exercise, especially if you get a lot of people registered for this. Is AI going to be utilized to be able to do that scan and find those brokers, find my information, and then eliminate it, or somehow get me to opt out, get me opted out of being in their databases so I don't get as much potential information?
The chat has ended. Thanks for the question. So the drop system is you guys have done more work on this than I have, but the drop system is I think it's a really important step forward for Californians, partly because of the challenge I was articulating earlier about just the cognitive load that we all face trying to maintain any control, and it's a losing fight to try to do that, site by site. And so yes, it deals with data brokers in California, and you have they are required, once you register with under the Delete Act with the drop system, the California Privacy Protection Agency will then let them know they're required to delete your data within 45 days. Now, it's not all data. So a couple of areas of legislation right now are issues like, okay, what is it? Because the way the laws are written, you were right. It's data because our existing data protection is largely on data where the holder of the data is the one that collected the data, right? So, and that sounds obvious, but it's not obvious because many data holders also have data that they have purchased or otherwise acquired from others that they did not acquire from you as the user. But these data brokers are generally folks that don't have, not exclusively, but generally don't have direct relationship with you as a consumer. So I guess mechanically, yes, the privacy is even though it's a lot of data and several 100,000 Californians signed up for this within weeks of it coming online at the beginning of the year in January, and we expect more. The actual deletions will occur in September in this first round, but anybody can sign up and it will be within that 45-day time frame after that. So it sounds like a Herculean effort. It's not really in order for that to be accomplished, and the agency has the power to enforce in that regard too if they suspect the data brokers are not complying with the provisions of that.
The Senator's exactly right. When we wrote the privacy laws, I worked for the Assembly member who wrote the original privacy law in the state, and it really applies to the businesses that you directly interact with. And so there was this gap. If you think of the Delete Act, was really about bridging that gap between the businesses who you directly give your information to, as the Senator was pointing out. There's also the businesses that you indirectly get your information, so it's the data brokers. And so what he did was there was this data broker registry that was created. And so that's where we talk about the data brokers who are registered. So with the Attorney General's office, any data broker under the law has to register. The problem becomes that you as an individual had to go individually with each data broker and seek to delete your information one by one. So the DROP Act was created to make it a much more streamlined process. So it's really just about bridging that gap, making kind of a one drop, one button kind of way of deleting your information across the board. So plus, I use that right now.
Thank you very much.
If I could just add one other thing, so that another thing to be aware of is that California also was, I think, the first United state in the US to require the usage of, or require companies to recognize the global piracy control in browsers, and so that you can set a privacy setting there. That would then mean you don't have to go through and pretend, but not really read every single privacy thing and check it out, but it will send a direct signal. This is an innovation from Europe, so that passed last year, and will be coming to implementation beginning of the year, beginning of next year. That will also help. So we're trying now that California's built one probably the strongest privacy regime in the country. Now, at least for me, a lot of our responsibilities. How do we make it? How do we Jeffrey it? Like, how do we make it more human centered? We've made it work. We've designed a system that works really well for people who will devote however much time and brain power to their privacy protection as they possibly can. They love this stuff, but that's not most people. And so we're trying to find more of these shortcuts, more of these human-based systems that will allow people to set these settings on a more general basis.
Thank you. Another question from the audience. Everyone, my name is Zachary. First off, thank you so much. I bet you guys were all excited listening to each other. There's a lot that I learned that I think I would be as interested in AI until we all started talking. So I'm 33 years old. I was born, obviously with the internet coming in, so that was already established. But Google came in and Wikipedia came in, and I was concerned, particularly with Wikipedia. Are you going to basically copy and paste it, Wikipedia with Google and with Wikipedia? We have direct sources, and so with AI and ChatGPT and all these tools, that I'm worried about the younger generation that is younger than me, and also the generation that's being born and will be born over the coming years. And so, how are we going to address? Because it feels like the younger generation isn't necessarily looking at resources or looking at direct references, and they're not doing it in a way where they're actually they're using it as a tool to supplement and allow them to actually look into the information that they're gathering. So it seems like they're using it as a way to think for themselves, and they're not actually doing critical thinking skills. They're not actually trying to figure it out and use it as a tool. They're using it to think. And so how are we going to, what are your thoughts on that? And what are ways we can steward, be shepherds to our young generation and essentially teach them that it's tools, not a way to think for themselves?
Again, this is why I think AI literacy is so important, and why Chamber push for this in schools. And I do think that it's important that we not just promote it, but we actually invest in it. So I do think we have to put our money where our mouth is at some point, and not just as government, but I think as industry as well. I didn't say that on behalf of Chamber, I say that on behalf of Ronak Daylami. But I do think, and I worry about this too. I have a niece who is 17, and one of the reasons I left the Cap was because I want to be much more active in her life, and I needed to have more life balance. So I think about this all the time. And I talk to her about it all the time. I think we just have to be more active in that way. But I think a lot of the solutions can be in the technology itself as well. I saw this thing recently, a friend sent it to me, this new AI tutor I thought was really fascinating, because that's one of the concerns I often have, is that it's replacing the way that we think. But it was really cool that this tutor technology it actually teaches the kids to find where their thinking actually went wrong. It doesn't teach them, it doesn't tell them where they went wrong, but it finds a way, and I can't even explain to you how. You have to watch the video, because I'm not smart enough to tell you. But it actually teaches them to find the breakdown of where their whole thought process went wrong. And it's really fascinating to watch this. I can send it to you later if you'd like it, but it's fascinating to watch them, and it actually teaches them to think critically and find their own mistake, and then they can kind of course correct it. So it's cool to see that the technology can be the problem, that it can also be the solution. And that's what is so fascinating about this, about these tools is I think sometimes what I worry about is in trying to course correct, we might actually preclude some of this. But I agree, I think that was a problem, and I do think that we need to really heavily invest in trying to actually teach this sense. It's very easy to fall.
Can I just quickly pick up on the stream of the point all the way up until the end, which is that you know, even when the internet came out, this might change the way we think, and it has fundamentally changed the way that we think. You know, our brains work completely differently. And 33, maybe we'll have to go back to the 70s. But you know, before the internet, you did not have, your brain did not function with the notion that you could know anything at any moment. If you're sitting around the dinner table on Friday and you're having a discussion about a topic, and like is Ukraine north or south of Russia? Who knows? Who knows? Well, that's what do you think? What do you think? At the end of the dinner, you still don't know. And Saturday, you know, you cut Little League, Sunday the library's closed. You may not know until Monday. The idea in today's world that you couldn't possibly know any piece of human knowledge relatively instantly is a radical change to the way that we conceive of the world of information and what we think of critical thinking is in the first place. I don't think that's worse off. Maybe we are in some ways, but there are trade-offs. So I think there's a lot of humility needed by those of us that have been born already about the plasticity of brains and of young people who will experience some of these things without the way we put them into boxes, the way that we think about all that's been lost. And through, you know, the things that no longer happen now that we don't all sit around a fire and listen to a bard sing us the news for 7 hours. You know, oh my God, what happened to our short-term memory? We used to be able to remember 7 hours of storytelling. We can't do that anymore. Right, so you know, which is why I also think that right now we've got a bunch of legislative proposals like let's make sure no one under 18 ever even knows what a chatbot is. That they never ever go on social media. Like there's a lot of these proposals which are all for all the right reasons, but it also means okay, so the first time you would ever experience chat, you know, AI would be when you turn 18, right when you leave home and school, and now you're on your own. Maybe hopefully you're in college, but maybe not. And now it's like all of this is now on you, and so we just have to. I think we have to, attend to children's safety, but also their development, their possibilities, and do exactly what you're talking about, which is talk, engage and go on that journey together and figure it out together.
I'd like to finish on that, but I actually asked a different question because actually, sorry. So I'm Dr. PJ Carvino. I coordinate the program in design studies here at Sacramento State, including the development of a new program, graduate program in transdisciplinary civic-oriented design, to bring design thinking into the civic sphere. My question really is about, again, I really want to follow up on the last question and dive a little bit deeper. Like Dr. Ashtari, I incorporated virtual tutors into my classes this past semester. I showed students the difference between starting from a blank slate versus starting from their own ideas and encourage them, of course, to see their own voice, find their own voice. But over the last couple of years, I am seeing a real disintegration in their critical thinking skills. And studies are already coming out that show a negative correlation between AI use and critical thinking skills, this ability to analyze and synthesize information, to reason, to create arguments, to test their hypotheses. Most importantly, to deal with uncertainty and likelihood, they come in thinking there's a definite answer for everything. And so I feel that AI is really useful only if it frees up cognitive resources for more complex thinking. And I think you've all touched on that in thinking about what the new jobs can be if those entry-level jobs go away. And I'm trying to foster cognitive resilience by encouraging students to engage in activities that really promote deep thinking and analytical reasoning. The challenge, though, is how do we, or what suggestions do you have, not so much to regulate, but maybe to shift the culture and its use by our young people so they can develop those higher order skills without the undermining of their critical thinking skills, which happens the more they use AI. And we've touched on the dark patterns in social media and the dark patterns of the addictive qualities of the digital realm, and that are also present in AI, right? It's pleasurable. It's like drug use. You get a high, it's very pleasurable to use. I can do as much as I can to have a classroom experience where they are talking to each other, using their verbal reasoning skills. The minute they go home, they're using ChatGPT or another AI to do their work. So I see this as something we may want to talk about. Yes, we don't want to have a rule that says you can't use ChatGPT until you're 18. But with other addictive substances, that's what we do. Addictive substances that undermine I'm not suggesting that that's the answer, but I'm asking for you, what suggestions do you have so that we can build that culture? Because it can't be just teaching them. That's not going to be enough.
I can share my perspective about this because this is something I think about. I teach programming and as I said, students coming with like no background, and I'm not expecting them to have any background, but that logical reasoning, that problem solving skill is really lacking there. And I think there are different reasons behind that, but one thing that I can think of is the K-12, like the school system. I don't know, as you guys can see, I have an accent, so I was born and raised in Iran, and we have very much like math and physics and analytics courses during our like K-12, which is missing here. So you cannot teach critical thinking and like problem solving skills when they just come to college and just tell them, okay, this is what you're going to have. I taught the telecommunication class, computer networking class, and we were going to learn about like bits and bytes and what would be the 2 power 1 up to 2 power 8. That's it. And then when we had the exam, my students said that, are you going to ask math in the exam? And I said, math? You mean like 2 power like 2 and 2 power 7 is not math. It's just like single like multiplication. I mean, you should memorize that. So I think, and then I have some students that are coming from like some charter school or some like special school that they have some like education when they are in their like K-12. When they come to college, they're just more prepared. So apart from the technology, I think that the time that we have to teach our kids, if you have like toddlers, if you have like elementary school kids, you have to start teaching them about critical thinking and problem solving skill at that time. And when they come to college, that's already so late to teach them about this. And we cannot blame AI or chatbot. I mean, I'm telling my student that like you guys don't need to be worried about AI. So all these people in the capital, they have to think about how to solve this issue for us. They're governing us. So what you have to focus is in this class is to just like who you're best in this class and get your degree. So this is my perspective, but I want to hear from other panelists if they have other opinion.
Sure, I think that that you touched on something really important in comparison to social media age and now what we're dealing with AI in terms of the addictive nature of social media and that instant gratification that you can get. I think that the shortcuts of critical thinking is really a human tendency, a pathway of this resistance that is getting amplified. There's some of these technologies that we're getting the AI slop because it's the easiest path from point A to point B, and that's something that human beings are optimized to do. And so I think that in some ways we might consider how we can use maybe even social networking more productively in order to address the critical thinking part. because I think that the critical thinking muscle is really built in a dialogic fashion. It's best built there, not in isolation, working on a problem, right? And I think that when you can engage in that dialogue that doesn't include computers or phones or anything else, I think, and it's been a while since I've been in school, but when I was certainly when I was in college, I was seated in an auditorium professor at the time. And so I'm not sure how that's changed and how the pedagogy has changed since then, but I can see, because we're not going to keep students from using the tools in order to take shortcuts. We found ways to take shortcuts in the 80s, right? So they're going to keep using the tools to take shortcuts. So what do we do then in order to help encourage the other muscles that are atrophying, in absence?
Thank you. Thank you for referring to my cliff notes. Collections. All right. Let me remind everybody, I do have a dental appointment at 8 in the morning. So I need to wrap this up by 7:30. So I appreciate all that questions and I getting ready to come up. We do need to try to keep them a little bit short. So
Hey, all, my name is James. Last year I finished a fellowship with Caltrans where I worked on a lot of policy surrounding automated decision systems and AI. And Senator Cabaldon, I wanted to hear from you about what it's like to come up with definitions for AI legislatively, because these technologies have such a wide scope. And again, Marcie, I wanted to hear from both of you about what it is like from the executive branch side to implement these definitions and these policies from the legislature.
Well, this is what I'm supposed to be writing right now, and tonight, because part of the challenge with the law is that we should keep making it more and more flexible as the technologies start to become more differentiated. But like, who does that? There's no, like, I'm going to work on this tonight, and tomorrow I'll submit it. Hopefully, I'll get it passed. There will be no press release. No voters in Davis or in that we're going to have a great job center. So it's not the norm for this to occur. So so what I'm working on at the moment is Bro and others wrote maybe the same definition of AI that appears everywhere. And it's like 2 sentences, and it's not very definitive for a definition, but it also incorporates everything, right? And so it includes. If you have ChatGPT on a desktop computer, you have not enabled network egress, so it cannot go out of it can't go to the internet, it can't order things on Amazon, it can't do anything in the world. It's only a reflexive AI with you so that is treated the same as the AI that's going to file for divorce and kill somebody, right? And they have obviously very different, they apply different regulatory approaches. But right now we treat them all the same. And so when something inevitably happens in the world, this is an era. So when a Waymo hits a cat in San Francisco, everybody's like, oh my God, okay. So then we write a law, and the law says, no, nothing with AI shall ever kill a cat again. And anytime an AI sees a cat, you have to file a report with the state and whatever. And then you're just like trying to use your AI, your clock on your phone to see what species of cat you might adopt at the shelter, but now you're required by law to file a report at the state, right? So the same thing with automated decision systems. I'm like, okay, some of this makes sense, but then you keep reading down the list of definitions the row wrote, and it's AI, and then it's but then it gets like statistical modeling and like data analytics. I'm like, how can it possibly be that we're regulating the data analysis tab on Excel the same as we're regulating the most high-powered automated decision systems run by supercomputers and AI? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So it is important. It's not easy to write those definitions because the technology is changing rapidly, and you're writing and it doesn't have itself doesn't have definitions in the real world either. But I think it's very important that we legally start to be much more fine-grained and create these taxonomies of what these big words like AI really mean, so that we're right sizing the legal and regulatory framework to match the potential threats and potential harms.
I've got 25 questions. Good one. My name is Greg Kiefer. I ran a software security company for 35 years. I retired 3 years ago, and I have 3 degrees right now, and I went back for 2 more. I'm a huge advocate of AI. I use AI in all of my learning experience in school. I also been a guest speaker here at Sac State for over 20 years. And have helped students. I also helped rewrite some of the courses at Sac State 4 years ago to integrate AI into that course. We're still teaching that same material in some of the courses here at Sac State. One of the things we did recently was modify the course material to actually implement more critical thinking aspects of that. That's about neuroplasticity and what's fun thing. As part of this exercise of working with the students, I get to help coach the students. The fear of AI, both job displacement and other stuff is huge. But the people that I've coached, this has been eye-opening for me as an opportunity to work with the students, to help them have a conversation with their employers, how they can leverage AI to be more productive, increase critical thinking, and also be more creative. So one of the things I wanted to ask some of the employers here is, what expectations do you have for AI industry as part of that job application process? And once they get the job, how are your expectations different on their level of performance and their competency to deliver the work you expect them to deliver as a be? I'm tired now, so I don't even want movies. It's still very relevant to me because it helped me coach the students. If I had AI available to us during COVID, we were analyzing the governor's data in California, it would get so much easier. The surveys that we're getting.
You know, in public sector, we don't have a classification yet that fits into AI. So we still hire, you know, the similar classifications that we hire for computer science or infrastructure or things like that. So and we have utilized other partners to help us with AI. We utilize Microsoft for Copilot. We utilize Google for our site. So we have been using other partners. We don't have yet classifications that defines AI. But we do have a team in Caltrans now that we are training in AI, that they have IT classifications. So whether, you know, your question was, if you hire somebody in AI, what is your expectations of that?
Well, the actual question was, hiring any person, any job classification, is AI literacy considered as part of that application process? And then once they have hired for the job, no matter what job, how is AI, your expectation of their access to AI impacting your expectation or your thought process? How do you, what the anticipated performance of the individual might be, because now they have a tool that they can use to enhance.
At this point, at least, yeah, I understand. At this point, we are not refining AI skills, but we are training. In my perspective, we are training in the tools that we have that we are providing them. So there's training happening weekly, monthly, and there's requirements that they have to meet in order to use AI.
Yeah, I just imagine, you know, today, I would not put, it's a requirement in a job description for the ODI that you know how to send an email. Right? But 40 years ago or 30 years ago, it might be understandable that you don't know how to send an email, but it's a critical job function in order to be successful at my company or my department. And so it's my responsibility to help you to be successful in that regard. Also because we're at a time where there's going to be huge parts of the workforce that are not going to go to college to learn how to send an email. They're going to learn it on the job. And so, especially in government, especially right now, we are really thinking about that on the job. And what is our responsibility to ensure that folks have the skills to be successful in the work that we need them to accomplish.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you're seeing in the work folks right now, a lot of what we do for CalChamber is trying to put in place the policies they have to make sure that rates are used responsibly. So you're not putting in like confidential information to these systems and you're using them for the thing. So it's less about like hiring for these positions and like for AI specific skill sets and jobs. It's about like we recognize that employees are using these. You don't want to make sure that they're not using them in a responsible fashion and client. That's what we're trying to do is get out there policies and make sure that we have passion. That's one of the things that I'll because a little bit of comfort that we're a ways away from an AI job apocalypse and still at the point of writing policies. So that's really where we're at.
All right, in respect of everybody's time, I'm gonna have one more question, I apologize. Get folks out of here and let's have the facility, so that way I'll invite you to Mike and shoot off the.
Thank you so much. So just to give you quickly the lens. So I work for a IT tech cybersecurity firm out of Roseville. I am a city commissioner. And so I look at across the city currently and in government, because I do private government contracts, how data is being used and aggregated to inform. So my question is for ODI. Shout out to you. I got a chance to see Jeffrey at CalCTA and heard you talk on that, and to Senator as well. In your opinion, beyond just the actual use of the LLM and then the prompting and then all the things we focused on, where and how do you see the actual implementation? Like what do you feel it takes, and from a programmatic governance project management to actually take the AI LLM usage and actually funneling top to bottom, right? From the top of government through your organizations, through all the departments and that responsibility. You know, and how to structurally embed the ethical governance usage, not as an afterthought, but with the communities that are impacted in mind, because that is something that I see in my work. That everyone talks about AI and yes, cybersecurity and all those things, but when you actually have to take it into a department and have that department implemented ethically, with the end user in mind, which is the community, right? Which is usually the disenfranchised, those that need the supports that the departments are using. So that's kind of my lens from a community perspective, you know, because that's the kind of where I sit in the actual embedding of the implementation of it from top to bottom, so that it impacts those that need it most. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very good and important question. Governor Newsom wrote the executive order on generative AI. I've lost track 2 years ago. It was a few years ago now, at least. And it directed ODI to do a number of things. One of which was to create an AI equity impact assessment. And so departments use that when they're looking to implement this technology, and we have to share that with you and your team. The other thing that we're doing, I think that's working quite well so far, is that when we developed the paperwork that you have to submit to the California Department of Technology in order to get approved to use technology, is really a use-based risk assessment, right? And so that's to a large extent, I think also is related to the conversation around how we legislate and why it's so difficult to regulate the technology, because what we really need to be thinking about is not the technology in and of itself, but how it's being used. And so when you're assessing the risk, you have to assess it on that use case basis. And lastly, I would say when you're doing that, and this is how we're currently approaching it, is to do that in a tiered approach of low, medium, and high based upon some really straightforward criteria, right? And that way you can have a responsible approach for implementation, hopefully not stifle the ability to move quickly. And so if you have the ability, and this is something that I'm thinking a lot about right now in terms of technology implementation in government and being able to move much faster. If you have the ability to buy software as a service, software off the shelf, and you're using it as a productivity tool to help your back office file paperwork faster, you shouldn't have to jump through hoops, write a 700-page RFP, prove to CDT and God and everyone else that you're not going to drain a small lake in Colusa County or whatever. I'm sorry. Right? You should just be able to buy the thing and use it. So again, like when it comes to that impact, we should early on be assessing what is the impact, what is the reach, who's going to be using to what end. And we should have a framework, not necessarily a policy or procedure, but a framework for thinking that through. And then from there, you can tailor what your governance and your procurement and your implementation of strategy ought to be.
Thank you, I know that, so I want you to say that, but that's an important part of the conversation that doesn't get focused on, so thank you.
Yeah, and he testifies to this every year in the budget subcommittee as well. And I think just to draw the connection to something that Ro earlier said, part of what I think we can do better is, and it's highly related to the risk issue, is where CalFresh eligibility determination is an example. So food stamps, what is the risk if we don't do anything? And for instance, my county, a 6-month waiting list for eligibility determination. The risk of not doing anything is that people will go hungry for 6 months. Okay, what is the risk if we design this and it only deals with saying yes? We use technology to say yes, and anything that's an edge case or a no, that's going straight to the okay. We're just using it for the yes. So what's the risk there? The only risk is that we might over yes. We might say yes to you even though you were really not quite eligible. Okay, how much of that are we willing to tolerate? Am I willing to tolerate $50,000 worth of too many yeses in Yolo County in order to have 100% of everybody else get their CalFresh on the first day instead of 6 months later? And if so, then we should say, go do it, and then let's learn. And if it doesn't work, let's not call in the programmer and the department director and say, how did you fail? But instead say, okay, what did we learn here? But we have to keep innovating and keep experimenting and creating the accountability, the evaluation, the audits and everything, but then use that as feedstock for the next one. So which is what the whole of it, I think, is, but it's something that we need to be doing government-wide with the state government and enable local governments to do it on a much broader scale.
All right, thank you. I'm going to invite Sylvia to come back up. Just a couple of closing thoughts. I think I resoundingly heard not a fad that's going away tomorrow. AI might stick around and change things. I will tell you that on my drive over here, I asked AI how long the session should take, and it said 2 hours on the dot. So it was close. We did run a little long, but thank you for all the participation. I think some of the questions were great. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. This really is a topic that we could talk about for hours. And you have a collection of skill sets and backgrounds in front of you that is pretty unique, from education to policy to business, legal. You've got a mix here. You heard viewpoints probably together that you won't hear. So thank you for attending, and I heard the microphone over to Sylvia and get out of the way.
I had a speech to give, but I won't do that. What I will say though is that I owe you a tremendous thank you for showing up for us, for being here for our audience. And I was asked to do something now. How many of you think AI policy should be shaped by people?
Yes.
If you say yes. Yes, So, the Office of Innovation place these in the back of the room. There's a QR code, and it's going to take you to a site where you can give your opinion. The good thing about it is there's no deadline. So do it at your leisure. Okay. And like I said earlier, What's Possible has a tradition of tackling issues that cover all over society. This, of course, is one of them. I was not expecting us to solve all of the problems. But it is 8 o'clock. And Russ does have a dental appointment tomorrow, and according to what he said. So thank you so much. We don't have, I put some time for additional networking. Jennifer, that is it permissible for additional networking or yes? So time permits, and if the panel is willing to stay a few extra minutes for you all, please feel free to mingle with them. And thank you again for being here today. It's really wonderful.
Yeah.